This week, we're discussing male victims of stalking and abuse. This segment features themes of domestic violence.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, Tristan.
So how familiar are you with the band My Chemical Romance?
I'm very familiar. They are one of my sister's favorite bands. When she was learning the guitar in high school, she tried to learn basically all of their songs, So
then I'm sure you're aware that they're currently on like reunion cross-country tour right now. And one thing that went viral during that tour was that lead MCR singer Gerard Way was walking through the crowd up to the stage, and he was, doing the thing where they stick their hands out, giving high fives to people as they go. And someone in the crowd licked his entire hand while they were walking through.
Ooh, that's gross.
There was a lot of online backlash to that, but surprisingly, there was quite a few comments that said some very interesting things. One person wrote, "Haha, funny. I wouldn't have done it too. Sorry, Gerard. He signed up for it." Another person wrote, "I would have kissed him in the mouth." Another person wrote, "Haha, people are offended with literally everything nowadays." What do you make of those comments?
I mean, I think if someone licked my hand without explicit permission, I would also be very grossed out and upset. I mean, I don't think that's crazy at all.
I think that those general attitudes that people express online underpins kind of a lack of understanding about how men can be targeted by these violation of boundaries, inappropriate contact, inappropriate relationships. So this week, I really wanted to speak with some experts on domestic violence about, the rates and the severity that men can be targeted by stuff like stalking, domestic violence, and domestic assault.
Absolutely. I'm really interested to hear it.
The first person I spoke with was Denise Hines, a professor of social work at George Mason University that focuses on under-recognized victims of intimate partner violence. What do you think the general public perception or public understanding about male victims of sexual violence or sexual harassment, stalking is?
I mean, there's lots of research to show that most people don't really think about men as victims of intimate partner violence. It is widely construed as something that only men do to only women. I think people may know of men who are victims of intimate partner violence or domestic violence, as it's commonly phrased, but they don't put that label on it. There are many studies that try to assess people's attitudes towards domestic violence against people of different genders. And what they do is they have these scenarios that you read about where they manipulate who the perpetrator is and who the victim is. And so the scenario is the same, but the genders are different. And so what these scenarios always show is that if a woman is the perpetrator and a man is a victim, those scenarios are seen as less severe, less deserving of any sort of intervention, and the victim is viewed as more blameworthy. So there is this perception that he must have done something to deserve it, that he is somehow at fault, that he must be the real perpetrator here.
What is the frequency of that domestic violence, stalking, harassment, etc.?
If we focus on just the latest data from the United States, that would be from the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey. They survey about 8,000 men and women about their experiences of intimate partner and sexual violence victimization and stalking victimization. And so when you define intimate partner violence victimization as a combination of physical, sexual, and stalking victimization, you find that in a 1-year time period, almost half of the victims of intimate partner violence are men. About half of the victims, when you look at psychological abuse, are also men. And so most people don't know this, but it is, that's the latest data on a population-based survey. These are self-report items. You basically ask, how often did your partner hit you? How often did your partner punch you? How often did your partner beat you up, and those kinds of questions. So it's not asking, were you the victim of a domestic violence? It's asking, how often did these acts occur to you and that your partner perpetrated them? Based on self-reports of what's happening in their relationships, about half of the victims are men, but we see that men are much less likely to report those incidences to the police or other authorities.
Why is there discrepancy with men reporting it?
Well, there's various internal and external barriers. So some of the internal barriers is just sort of failure to label this as something that needs to be reported or that should be reported. We see men as not thinking that they are a victim, but that she has a mental health issue or maybe a substance abuse issue, and that he needs to protect her and provide for her rather than reporting her and getting her in trouble. There are also barriers in terms of thinking he's a man, he needs to handle this himself. What will people think? Will I be blamed for this? Will she falsely accuse me, which she sometimes does? If I call the police, will she accuse me of being the instigator or the perpetrator here?
Next, I wanted to bring someone who currently works at a domestic and sexual violence center to the discussion. I spoke with Emily Mitchem, Executive Director of the Refuge House, which is a domestic and sexual violence center that serves the Big Bend region. In my email correspondence with her to set up the interview, she wrote that the realities of men as victims of stalking, harassment, and unwanted contact isn't discussed enough.
The perception is that this, sexual assault, stalking, domestic violence, dating violence, any of those things, child abuse, child sex abuse, those things happen to women and girls, and that somehow men and boys are absolved from that. And in fact, what we're seeing is that the rate of male survivorship is increasing to where it's almost half of where the female rate is.
Why do you think that general public perception exists?
Everything that we see and that we consume sort of on social media and in movies, TV, commercials is, men are the strong kind of absolved from vulnerability, and therefore not susceptible to any kind of violence, and that that happens to women and girls, and so I think it's sort of ingrained in us as a culture that, and not just I think this is probably everywhere, but that men do the abusing and they're not the victims, and in most cases that is true, but the experiences of male victims and the trauma that they go through when they are victims are important, and those stories need to be told and the services need to be available to them.
How often does Refuge House come into contact or help male victims?
Pretty often. We get several calls on our hotline. We have at least 2 or 3 a month, male victims that need to come into emergency shelter. We see a lot of men, adult survivors of child sex abuse in our sexual violence programming, and we have a good amount of men who come in for injunctions, and that number is going up.
Are there any roadblocks that pop up in administering men care that don't happen as frequently with women?
The biggest issue is that they are afraid to come forward. They don't want to be seen as a victim. They don't really trust the system because it wasn't really made for them in terms of domestic violence, stalking, those sorts of things. And there's a great amount of shame, I think, that most of the male survivors feel is just, this isn't supposed to happen to me. I should have been able to take care of it. If I do it, just a number of things internally that they have to overcome just to be able to get in the door. And I think that that's a bigger door to walk through for men than it is for women, because they just don't like to feel like vulnerable, and they don't want anyone to know what's happening or what's going on.
What would you say or advice would you give to a man who's experiencing some form of domestic violence or abuse but feels reluctant to come forward?
I would say, there's nothing to be ashamed of, and at Refuge House, you're not alone. We have, again, many men that come forward for help. You'll be welcomed and treated well.
If you or someone you know is experiencing partner abuse, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-SAFE.